Hotep, and welcome to Matters of Diversity with Dr. B. Today, we're going to have a really good show for you, talking with my girl, Hannah Anton. She's going to talk a little bit about what's been happening since the election. We had an opportunity to talk to her back in November, and her, along with her Republican counterpart here on campus, got an opportunity to just kind of talk about what they were seeing happening as we were approaching the election season. Now it's post-election, and we're going to have an opportunity to talk with her today. So I'm excited. I want to give you a little bit of a forewarning that my house is a little crazy today. I'm at home right now, and we're having some flooring done. So if you hear some banging or something like that, someone not coming from me, it is just the woodworkers of the people who are here doing that. And then my family is all lodged downstairs right now because there's no other space to go. So if there's any extraneous noises, that's what you're hearing. So let's get to Hannah. So Hannah's from Tampa, Florida, and is an undergraduate student at the University of Central Florida. She is in her third year, and she's studying political science, economics, and business. We need to talk about that. 3 majors. There we go. She has been a member of the College Democrats at UCF since 2018 and is currently serving as the president of the organization. Outside of school, she is active in the political and activist community and currently works for Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy. She is passionate about women's rights, environmental protection, and economic policy. So let's get right to the women's rights issue. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing phenomenally. And so kind of tell me a little bit about why 3 majors and how that's going to move you forward. I remember us talking before. You are looking into going into politics in some shape or form. And so how is this background going to support that move?
Yeah, so I have a major and 2 minors. I'm a political science major, and then it's minors in economics and business. I chose to do it that way because politics is so diverse. To be involved in politics, especially on the policy side, you have to know a little bit about everything. So that is why I chose it to do that way, as opposed to like doing a double major or something like that, because I wanted to be able to study as much as possible. The political science major is like the classes that are available are like on a very wide spectrum. They have classes, I've taken classes, everything from like the statistics behind political science to like human rights, environmental policy. So they have a lot of different classes. The one thing that they don't so much have is like economic policy, which is a passion of mine. So I've done an independent study in that. And then I also have my economics and business classes. So that's why I chose to do it that way. I do hope to go into politics. Right now I'm working for Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy, who is like the UCF area, like DC representation. And I'm really enjoying it. So
What kind of things are you doing for Stephanie?
So I'm an intern in her district office. The district offices mostly focus on constituent relations. So it's about like helping people if they have any issues and they come to the congresswoman for help, then we can help them out. But it's been super, super interesting so far. I've gotten to sit in on a lot of different congressional like meetings and stuff. So it's been great.
What has happened, or maybe what occurred regarding her office space up in the Capitol or in that area? I know that there are different office buildings up there, but were they impacted at all?
So I hadn't started working for them when that happened. I'm not exactly sure, but I do know that there are representatives who have offices in the actual Capitol, and then there's also an office building a few blocks away. So those people, while they were like put in lockdown just for safety purposes, there was no attack on that building, on the office building. So yeah, it was definitely a different experience for those employees.
Yeah, I can imagine that was the case. So thinking back to now, November 4th, I guess that was the day after, right? It was November 3rd, was election day. November 4th, we started all the drama around who was going to be the president. What was going through your mind and what were you thinking? Because you were pretty positive, I think, going forward that Biden would be our next president. So
Yeah.
what were some of the things that were happening for you with the way that the election was being called?
Yeah, it just took time for election results to come in, and that's not really anything super out of the ordinary. That happens. I mean, it takes time to count a lot of ballots. We had a lot of states this round that were closer than they had been before, and even states like Arizona that were flipped. So it just takes longer. Sometimes they're able to call, like with Florida, they were able to call it before counting every single ballot. That doesn't mean that every ballot doesn't get counted, they do, but sometimes they can just tell which way it's going to go, and with closer races, they can't. So it just takes a little longer. So it was definitely a little stressful. Those few days after the election, things were looking good. So I'm glad that they turned out the way that they did. But yeah, it was definitely stressful going forward. And then just with everything that happened after that and all the accusations of election fraud, that just, adds fuel to the fire.
Yeah. So I can imagine that the exit polling helps in them getting those numbers to be able to call a state or not. What is that process, and do you know a little bit about that, and what happens in those times?
So the way exit polling works is they have pollsters who stand outside the voting sites, and as people come out, they ask them who they voted for. There's no accountability in the sense that they could lie. There's no way to check since your ballot is secret, and also they don't reach everybody. So they are a pretty good indication precinct by precinct how things are looking. They also aren't at every precinct, and especially with the increase of early and mail-in voting that happened this cycle, they were a little bit less accurate, but they're a pretty good indicator of how a precinct will go. And if you take all the precincts together, then you have the state. So they're nothing official and nothing you can't call a race on an exit poll, but they're a relatively good indicator of how things will go in that area.
I was watching the news, and then they were saying that history has a lot to do with it. I was paying a lot of attention to what was going on in Philadelphia. And so what they were saying at the time was that when they were doing the different counties and things of that nature, you were able to tell from history, from years gone by, what different districts were, how they were, whether they were leaning Republican, whether they were leaning Democrat, and things along those lines.
Absolutely. It doesn't happen very often that some states, swing states flip back and forth every election or every couple elections. But when you get more and more local, those become a little more stable. So sometimes counties will flip, that does happen, but especially precinct by precinct, people just don't move that often. So yeah, those tend to be a little bit more stable, and you're able to track the history of those elections a little better.
So the ceiling was broke a little bit, and you got a female vice president. What's that like for you?
Yeah, it's definitely something to be celebrated. Not only is she the first female vice president, but she's the first person of color to serve at that level in the executive branch. So that is super exciting. Representation is really, really important. And I think that it's glossed over a little bit too often. Yes, of course, men can advocate for women's rights and for people of color. Of course they can, and they can be allies in those fights. But it's not the same as having somebody who actually has experienced what it's like to be a woman in politics firsthand. So it's definitely super exciting to have Kamala Harris as the vice president.
Sitting at the table, right? We talk about diversity and having people at the table, and she represents that. So how does that tie into how you view women's rights and the things that you are hoping to get accomplished in your tenure when you start getting into politics?
Yeah. It's all about, like I said, just having a seat at the table. It makes a difference. Women politicians, more often than men, are champions of women's rights. That just makes sense. So when you give women a seat at the table, then those issues are talked about and those issues are brought up. So it gives us an opportunity to be protecting, and expanding access to healthcare for women. Women just face a different set of issues. And especially here in the United States, we have a lot of issues with maternity leave and childcare. And those issues, especially when it comes to childcare and education, it doesn't seem like they directly impact women, but they do. If children can't go to school, especially we're seeing during this pandemic, it's more often than not the wife or the mother has to stay home to take care of them. And that's just how our society is set up. And so when you have systems for good childcare, not only K through 12, but also like early childhood care, have good systems for maternity leave, you're able to have more women in the workforce and pursuing their careers and their goals. So that's just one aspect of it. Also with healthcare, access to birth control, yes, that affects everybody, but really it affects women more. And so having access to not only birth control, but other healthcare services is really, really important for our entire population, but for women specifically.
Very nice. So tell me a little bit about how you got involved in politics and what was the passion that was built in you and where did it come from?
Yeah. So obviously President Trump was elected when I was a junior in high school. I had always been, my parents are pretty politically active, especially my mom. So, throughout Obama's presidency, they were relatively active. But I would say for myself, Trump's presidency is really what like launched me into action. And there were just a lot of events going on where I live in Tampa, Florida, is a relatively active community, especially where I went to high school, was pretty politically, students were pretty politically active in terms of like protesting for different issues. After the Parkland shooting, there were protests in Tampa that were put on by students that I went to school with. So that sort of started getting me into politics. And then in college, I decided to study political science, mostly because I was more interested in the like math statistics side, which is pretty uncommon for political science majors. But being in that major really exposed me to like the college Dems community and the activist community on campus. So here we are.
And so when you think about your future and things that you want to get involved in, do you have a clear career pathway right now, or is there something that you are still building onto?
Yeah, it's definitely something I'm still working on. This community is so fluid that it's really not a great idea to have like a set path because things change every election cycle. But I do hope to be able to work in DC in a district, in like a congressional office.
So I want to kind of hang out with the things that happened with the insurrection and things along those lines. What were things that were coming up for you when you saw all of that happening? As a young person, as a person who's just getting into politics, what were some of the things that were excited you or made you fearful about what you were seeing?
hmm Yeah, it was definitely mostly fear, I'll be honest, but also not necessarily. I feel that most people were relatively surprised by what happened, and I was surprised by the scale and the intensity of the events that occurred. But I feel like we maybe should have seen it coming a little bit better. Obviously, hindsight is 2020, but just given the events that it wasn't like that came out of nowhere. I mean, every single day since the election, there have been multiple sources, including elected officials, politicians, the media, people online peddling these lies about election fraud. So, we can't really be surprised. I mean, people were angry. If you tell somebody that something is true for long enough, they're going to believe it. And so I don't know that we can really be that surprised that those people felt so like deeply that they needed to like try to overthrow the government, I guess. I mean, I don't know that we can really be surprised by that when people that they trust and people in positions of power had been telling them that the election was stolen. I mean, had that been true, if that was true, that's a very big deal, and action would have needed to be taken by citizens if the election had really been stolen. So I do feel that we should have maybe seen it coming a little more, but definitely it was a day for the history books. I guess we'll just put it that way. I think this is something that will impact our country for a very long time.
Now, have you been to the Capitol building itself before?
Yes, I have.
And so you know that it's very difficult to get inside that building. You have so many security clearances and things that you have to do to get in. So when you saw individuals inside doing the things that they were doing, what came up for you there?
Well, like you said, I have been to the Capitol, and I know that there's a lot of steps to get in there. You don't just walk into the Capitol. So I was a little bit surprised to see how quickly things progressed. It made me question a little bit, like if there was more to it than maybe we were seeing. If there had been like a little bit more planning and things like that going on, I just don't totally understand how they were so unprepared, especially given what was going on inside the Capitol, and that, it's not super often that you have pretty much every single member of Congress in the Capitol at the same time. They all work there, but the members are like going back and forth from their districts to their office. They're having meetings around the city. So it's not very often that you have them all, especially both houses, in one room. That just doesn't happen very often. So I feel that the security maybe should have been a little bit higher. I know that they've been like looking into what happened there. But yeah, it's definitely a little disheartening to see like some of the pictures that we've seen, like people carrying Confederate flags through the Capitol. Like, people like fought and died to make sure that that never happened. And now here they are, like rifling through offices, and taking their pictures of people who like took letters and like letterheads from Nancy Pelosi's desk, like things like that. Yeah, it's just, and also to see like there's a picture of members of Congress like huddled on the House floor, and like the Secret Service is like in like a gun standoff with the rioters, or just like things like that. You don't think that things like that happen in America, but they definitely do, and it's something that needs to be addressed.
So what if you were to kind of hand down some type of sentencing to the people that were involved, especially those who were taking pictures of documents and things along those lines? It seems as though some people are looking at getting off, right? Saying, I was called here. That's not the type of person I am. I'm not what you see in those pictures. I'm not screaming and yelling on top of my voice, get Pence and do this and do that. Mm-hmm. What do you say to those people, and how does that reconcile with the parties itself, right? So those are people, those are individual people, but there's some integrity, or hopefully there's some integrity that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have. And are they following suit? Are they doing what you think they should be doing?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I do feel that justice absolutely needs to be served. I mean, in this age of the internet, and the fact that there were rioters who walked out of the Capitol like in front of a CNN camera and were like, yeah, I was just in Nancy Pelosi's office. Like, I mean, they're not hiding it. They're not like trying to be stealthy. They shouldn't be difficult to find. And I do know that a lot of arrests have been made, and the FBI and other law enforcement agencies are working on that. So, we have to put faith in them to do that. And that's not something that private citizens can really handle. But I do hope that our justice system is able to adequately deal with those people. I'm not super familiar with what the sentencing would be for somebody like that. But yeah, definitely. And then in terms of the integrity of the parties, I mean, it is important to have unity. And I know Joe Biden is extremely focused on unity in his presidency, especially during this COVID pandemic, because that is impacting everybody. And we need every single member of Congress working together to help the American people on that, but on other things as well. But you can't have unity without accountability. And it's not a secret that I won't say 100%, but most of the people that were there all fall on one side. And that party needs to address that. The Republican Party needs to be addressing that faction of their followers and of their supporters. And I just haven't seen that. There have been some members of Congress and some elected officials that have, but not all of them. Some even are in support. So that is just, that just isn't okay. They all know that, like, Joe Biden is the president. Like, it already happened. It hadn't happened at that point, but it has happened, and everybody knew that it was going to happen. They can talk about claims of election fraud and of like vote tampering, but those claims were taken up by the justice system, and there was no evidence of things like that. So there definitely needs to be accountability within not only the citizens that broke the law and did all of that in the Capitol, but also with the elected officials that are supporting them and just aren't upholding their constitutional duty.
So do you see disparities, or what are the disparities that you see as a young person with regards to how they the militarized the Black Lives Matter movement and the things that happened during this particular time, especially when they say that there were clues that there were these types of things that may be happening on the January 6th day.
Right. Yeah, I think had those been Black Lives Matter protesters, things would have ended very differently. And I'm not saying that. I think something that gets like miscommunicated sometimes when we say that we have to like understand that Black Lives Matter protesters were treated differently than these rioters. We're not saying that we wish that those rioters had been treated the way that Black people are treated by the police. We are saying that we want Black people to be treated the same way as everybody else. It's not about like we wish that Capitol Police had like opened fire on everybody and like spilled blood all over the Capitol. Like that just isn't the way to handle things. The police and other law enforcement agencies, those aren't the ones that are supposed to be, you know, putting judgment against these people. That's what the judicial system is for. So, you know, I fully believe in innocent until proven guilty, but you know, they've essentially proven guilt themselves. So yeah, it's just very, I'm not saying that I'm not surprised that they were treated differently than Black Lives Matter protesters over the summer. I am disappointed in how many comparisons I have seen between those two events. I can't say that I'm surprised, but yeah, it's disappointing because they're nowhere near the same thing. I know that there were issues this summer with those protests becoming maybe not violent, but you know, there was some like destruction of property. But there was even investigation into that wasn't actually the Black Lives Matter protesters, that it was other people that were coming to like tarnish the reputation of those protests and those people.
So right, you're speaking very much a truth there. How do you change the narrative so that people know the truth? Because so many people spin it to their own good, right. But there wasn't actually a lot of factual information that was coming out about what was happening in those cases, which sells the point why somebody would come and say the election was being stolen, because again, they're being fed these falsehoods.
Right.
How do we change that? You're a young person, up and coming, you want to get into politics. How do we change that narrative from people really falling for the okie doke
right.
when these things happen?
Yeah, so that I will say, like, that isn't the responsibility of the people. Those rioters at the Capitol should not have done what they did, but it isn't their fault that they've been fed lies for, I mean, the past like 4 or 5 years. Mostly, there have been a lot since the election, but I mean, this didn't start on November 3rd. So it's not their fault that they've been fed lies. They shouldn't have acted the way that they did. But really, that comes down to accountability in our media and in our elected officials. The president shouldn't be able to get up and say that he was reelected and that he is the rightful president and that the other guy is like stealing the election when that just isn't true. Typically, even if you do have like an active court case going on, you're not necessarily supposed to speak about what's going on in the court case until it has been ruled on. You know, so, and then once it has been ruled on, that's something that has to be abided by. I mean, if you feel that it was incorrect, you can appeal, but all of those were shot down. I mean, even some of the like accusations of fraud never even got a trial because the judges were asking the attorneys if they had evidence and they said no. You can't have an investigation without evidence. And also it is the responsibility of the media to be ensuring that, you know, we have some level of trust for the media. That's how we get our information. That's how civilians get information. And just the discrepancies in like what is being reported on and the way that it's so unclear what is an opinion and what isn't is a huge problem. But yeah, it definitely comes down to the accountability in the media, in politicians, and also online. Oh, I think you're muted.
The media needs to be a little bit more accountable.
I think you're muted again.
So when they do speak the truth, it's really interesting that they are not. I'm trying to toggle not having the noise being a part of this conversation, but the media does have some responsibility, but they do show certain things. Like one of the things that came up recently in the media is this meeting that President Trump or former President Trump had with one of the congressmen. What's your thoughts on that?
So I'm not super familiar with exactly what you're talking about, but yeah, it is as much as it is the responsibility of the media, they also report on what the elected officials and those in power are saying. So if, for example, former President Trump were to say something that's a lie, and then the media reports that Trump said that, that's not necessarily a lie because he did say that. And even things like the media needs to be able to broadcast if like the president has a press briefing, or any elected official, like the media needs to be able to broadcast that. The people need to be able to hear from their leaders. So it really is even more the responsibility of those leaders to be held and for them to be held accountable when they do, I'll say make mistakes, but they're not always exactly mistakes. So yeah, we need to have accountability in our system. We have this, and I won't say that it's new in the past 4 years because it isn't, but it was just amplified. We have this idea that those that are in power, we have an issue holding those people accountable. We saw during the Trump administration that it was decided by his attorney general that a sitting president couldn't be indicted. That doesn't make any sense to me. We need to be able to hold those people accountable. It's even more important that people like that are telling the truth, are, abiding by our laws, because people rely on them. And people, when you are in a position of power, when you hold an elected office, your words have more weight than the average person. And that responsibility needs to be taken seriously. And if it isn't, then we need to have steps to deal with that and to hold those people accountable.
That makes a lot of sense. When you think about that accountability, what's the accountability that you have to your peers? So like as a president of the Democratic students on campus, what is your responsibility or the responsibility of the others in leadership with you to kind of toe the line and help people understand why they should be politically involved?
Yeah, absolutely. We, as myself and also the rest of the board, we're very open and accessible in the sense that like anybody is welcome to reach out to us at any time. All of the like College Dems contact information is relatively well known, and also like our Instagram and other social media pages. Our meetings are also open to the public and any UCF student across any level, any side of the political spectrum, wherever they fall, they're welcome to come to our meetings. We always, at the end of our meetings, hold like for questions. Once we're finished, people are welcome to stay and speak to us. But yeah, we definitely take our responsibility seriously, and are careful in what we put out online. And we just know that the things that we say, we're speaking for our organization. Even when we think that we're not, we still are. And so it's important to keep that in mind. And we definitely take that responsibility seriously.
I was really impressed by the fact that you and the Republican group on campus get along so well, and actually do engagements together in terms of some of the types of programming that you do on campus. What is that like to be able to have that kind of a conversation and relationship with those individuals? And I guess I'm asking that question in light of if there were people who were in actual Congress right now who were going across party lines and trying to compromise and do those types of things, what lessons could they learn from you all in terms of how you all treat this and this responsibility that you have?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everybody agrees on something. Even among the parties, there are things that they agree on. But what it comes down to is like differing values. Some people think that some things are more important than others. Also, like at the end of the day, we all just want a better America. Well, every congressperson should want a better America. And they may have different ideas on how to get there or about what that looks like. But there are things that we can agree on. In Congress, you tend to have the most, well, not the most, but you have more extreme viewpoints in Congress than you do in the American public. There are moderates in Congress, but even still, it tends to be those that are more extreme, that get media attention. They're the ones that are like on social media that are more like popular in terms of like the general public. So they have difficulty seeing eye to eye. And when it comes to working together, it's just about figuring out, like right now, for example, with COVID, the American people need help. That's not up for debate. They need help. And yeah, everybody has a little bit of a different way that they think that the American people should be helped. But
Right.
the bottom line is that something needs to be done. The people need help. We need to get this virus under control. We now have vaccines. There's another one coming out in the next few weeks, I believe. So we need to be able to get those to as many people as possible, as quickly as possible, and ensure that the state and local governments that are handling that have the resources to do that. So that is something that it makes sense to me that they would be able to agree on, but we see that that doesn't always happen, and that is political. That is about, if the Republicans vote on something when the Democrats control every segment of government, then it's a win for the Democrats. And so even if it would benefit their constituents, they don't want to do that because they don't want to win for the opposite party. We saw that a lot in a lot.
Right. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, that's the beauty of compromise, and that's the beauty of making sure that you're doing the right thing for your constituents. When I think about that, I think about the opposition when they tried to kind of, I guess, be, oppositionists, right? They go in and they don't do something even though they know it's the right thing to do, and they say that they're speaking on behalf of their constituents. And then oftentimes it's like, no, that's your thought. That's what you're thinking. When did you go out and speak to your constituents and get that kind of a viewpoint? And what I heard today was somebody said, well, they don't necessarily go out all the time and talk to their constituents, but their constituents speak to them when they vote for them back into office. So you know that they're speaking their language when they do those types of things. But if somebody's doing something that doesn't support you, it just seems really interesting. So I have a hard time. I don't know what you think, but when anybody, whether they're Democratic or Republican, who seem to be more in line with perhaps lobbyists and business than they are for the actual common person who they're supposed to be representing.
There's definitely two schools of thought, and maybe more, but two main schools of thought when it comes to representation. And that is, these people elected me, so whatever I think is right, like they elected me to do what I think is right. And then the other way is they elected me, so every time I make a decision, it has to be based on what they want. And I would say that I believe that the best form of leadership is a little bit of a mix of both. It's not realistic to think that, Congress takes like hundreds and thousands of votes every session. It's not realistic to really be going out and polling your constituents for each of those decisions.
Understand.
But when it comes to, but you can still have a general idea of what your constituents think, what's important to them. If there's an issue that comes up that is super controversial or hotly contested, or you're not sure what your constituents think, that's a time to go out and inquire their responses. It is true that people do come to their representatives, like without being asked. People write their representatives, call the offices all the time. That isn't always super representative of what the people think, especially because every congressional office phone number is available online. So I could be calling senators from like Wisconsin and telling them how I think, and I'm not one of their constituents, and they might not necessarily know that. So there are issues there, but yeah, definitely elections are important and they have consequences, and that voting.
So I get that part, but so I know that when you see Congress people before the media or whomever, and they're saying things like, well, the American people want, then at least there should be some kind of hearing from the American people as to what they want. It comes across as false. It seems like this is what you're saying, And it goes back to, like you're saying, the lies about the election, right? And that there was this election fraud and all this other stuff. Sometimes it seems like, there's lies that come across in that way as well. Like, well, the American people want so and so and so and so. Well, did you really poll the American people? And if you
Yeah,
didn't poll the American people, that should not be something that you say. I don't know.
Right. And it's also like, especially for people that are involved in politics, you align yourself with people that you agree with. And so, it's very easy to think, oh, everybody thinks that the way I think because all my friends think that, and everybody that I interact with think that, all my friends on Facebook, all my ads on Instagram, like they're all this way. That means that everybody must think that. And that's really not true. And that's something that we see a lot in the public. But because these individuals have taken on the added responsibility of being a public servant, it's part of that title that they need to know what the people actually think, not what they think, not just what their supporters think, not just what their friends think, not just, they need to know what everybody thinks.
Totally agree. So how do we get there? How do we think for ourselves in a way that we are not kind of jaded by like all of the one-sidedness, right? And so if I see a picture, picture says 1,000 words, right? So many of us interpret it in whatever ways that we interpret it. But it is my thought, right? But like if 18 people come to my way and say, well, that picture is this, and I start saying, well, that's the picture, then it doesn't really pay into the fact that I'm being observant of what everybody's opinion is. I'm just now leaning towards what I heard the most about whatever this is, and that sways my way of thinking. That makes sense? I don't know if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the way that everybody thinks is shaped by their environment. So yes, you can think for yourself, not that you can't, but the way that you think and the values that you hold are shaped by how you grew up, how your friends think, how your parents think, the kind of education that you had. But yeah, it's definitely important that people are looking into like their sources and not taking information as fact from sources that aren't factual. Facebook is a great platform, but you can't be taking like what Uncle Joe said as fact. You need to be looking into that, especially like even some of these news sources that aren't necessarily mainstream. If you see a news article about something and you go to Google it and that's the only thing that comes up, like it probably isn't true. You just need to be, people just need to be looking more into what they consider to be fact. And that responsibility, again, does at least a little bit come down on elected officials. Elected officials and the things that they say are used to back up differing opinions. Those are used as fact. So, when elected officials are the ones peddling lies, it makes it even more difficult to convince people that that isn't the case. So it's definitely an issue that we have in the US, and accountability will help with that.
I got two questions for you. One question is, what's the issue that you're most passionate about that you want to see happen, that you would love to see pass in Congress?
Right now, I think the number one issue needs to be COVID relief. That is like an extremely pressing issue obviously in our country and in the world right now, but especially in the United States. Outside of that, I would say either environmental protections or some sort of legislation to deal with economic inequality. They kind of go together in the sense that the same people are affected by both issues and they can be related. But I would say that those are the most important, in that if we don't have a safe planet to live on, nothing else really matters if our planet is unlivable. And in terms of economic inequality, I think that fixing that issue will fix a lot of other issues. And that's a very complex topic, and legislation to be made on that would be extremely complex and not something that can be, rolled out in like a president's first 100 days. That just isn't the nature of that issue. But yeah, it's definitely something that needs to be addressed.
So make a case for COVID relief from your perspective. What do you want to see done? And so coming from your perspective, I don't necessarily want to party on it or anything like that. But you, Hannah, you are actually one of the most extremely intelligent women that I've had a chance to talk to as a college student. I am so impressed with what you bring to the table. And I just want to hear your perspective on how do we get COVID taken care of, just from Hannah.
Sure. So first, we need to control the virus. There needs to be a nationwide mask mandate. I know President Biden has sort of put one into effect, but his jurisdiction is a little limited, so it's only like federal buildings. It doesn't really impact like when you go to the grocery store. It's not that sort of impact. It's not that sort of mandate. So we need a nationwide mask mandate. We need a stay-at-home order. We need funding for vaccine distribution. We need things like increased amounts of PPE for people. I know we've had some issues with teachers having to purchase PPE for their students and like for their classrooms out of their like personal budget. That's just not okay. And then we also need economic relief. It's not a secret that this pandemic has almost essentially destroyed our economy. And the people that see the brunt of that are working people. It's not the Jeff Bezoses of the world that are struggling. It's the working people that have been put out of work, their hours have been cut, things like that, and those people need help. So we definitely need economic stimulus for those people. Additionally, we need things like, I said, increased vaccines, but for a larger portion of the population. That is a difficult issue because obviously supply is limited. So there's only so much that can be done about that, but we need to be tackling those. We need to be tackling those that are unable to comply with stay-at-home orders first. So people like nurses, doctors, those that work on the front lines, even people that like work at grocery stores and other essential businesses, they're not able to stay home. Teachers is another example. They're not able to stay home. To have a functioning society, we have to have nurses, doctors, first responders, grocery stores. So those people need to be taken care of in the very beginning stages of vaccinations. And just, yeah, definitely economic relief is up there as well.
See, I need someone like, I need to kind of clone everything that you do and put it into politicians and make them be able to see that and understand that. Because that's really what it's all about, right? It's about caring for your human beings who are right beside you. And
absolutely.
Maybe not
an issue that we see a lot in Congress is that they lose sight of that. And it becomes more of, how do I get reelected? What do I have to do to make myself look good? What can I say to make the other side look bad? How can we spin this for our benefit? And at the end of the day, that is absolutely the wrong outlook to have. Being in Congress or having any sort of elected office shouldn't be used for that person's benefit. They need to be working for the benefit of the public. So definitely being able to put their personal aspirations and wants aside to make the best for the public is where we need to be.
It's really interesting when you see a politician who takes one stand and then either walks it back very quickly or does something to let you know that, wait a minute, you just said this like last week, and now that someone called you or challenged you on it, you're jumping ship and you're doing this. What comes to mind for you when you see politicians doing stuff like that?
Sure. So I'll just start by saying that it's not easy to go against your party. Like people say all the time, like reach across the aisle, side with the other side. Like I will say that it's not easy to go against your party. Parties are powerful. If you don't have that party behind you, you will not get reelected. That's like essentially just the fact is that you
But should it be about getting reelected or should it be about standing behind your principle?
I'm not saying that it should be about getting reelected, but that is like at the top of the list when elected officials are making decisions, how it will affect their reelection.
Should it be term limits?
At the top of the list. I do believe that there should be term limits in Congress. I know that there's a bill on the floor right now about term limits, and I think that bill is a little bit flawed, but I do believe that there should be term limits in Congress for that exact reason. that they shouldn't be so concerned with getting reelected, and they should be more concerned with serving their people. And you would think that those two would go together, but they don't. Because at the end of the day, as long as our elections are set up the way that they are with no regulation, people with money and power have more say in elections than the average person.
Yeah.
So until we can get that cleaned up, it's going to be difficult to make changes. When it comes to politicians like flip-flopping on their ideals, I'm a little bit hesitant to make judgments on that, simply because I do think that it should be more acceptable as more information becomes available for public officials to change their mind. They are often hesitant to do that because they don't want people to think that, you know, they're flip-flopping, or they like don't really know what they think, or they're just trying to save face.
Yeah, I get that for policy. I don't get that for some of the things I've seen happen over the last couple of
Right,
months.
definitely. Yeah, and that just has to do with influences that aren't necessarily accessible to the public, that are like running behind the scenes, things like lobbyists, big donors, even the party. Like I said, it's not easy to go against your party. They're powerful. So things are happening behind the scenes. So while it may appear that like, oh, they said one thing one day and something else the next, a lot happened between those two events to make them change their mind. And what's difficult about that is then you don't really know what that person thinks. You don't know
Yeah, that's the hard part.
which, right, you don't know where they stand. So yeah, definitely we need to be focusing on getting big money out of politics, and focus on helping the American people.
I love that. I love that. And you know, do you think that the new generation that's coming forward, people like you, when you start to get into public office, you think that there's a change in that kind of mentality, or do you think that people will get involved and kind of follow the status quo?
Um, I think it really makes a difference, I think, person to person. A lot of people get in politics just to stroke their ego. So definitely weeding
That's
out people like
interesting
that
in
would
and
be
of itself.
ideal. Weeding out people like that would be ideal, but I don't know that it's necessarily super possible. Sometimes it can be difficult in a campaign to even know that your politician or the person that you're voting for is somebody like that. And I definitely think election finance reform should be top of the list, in terms of that's the best way to fix something like that. People think that election finance reform only impacts election years, but that is not true. That absolutely is not true. It's impacting every single decision that an elected official makes.
Right.
And so getting that under control, having more regulation and more, not only accountability, but like accessibility of information, more transparency in election finances is super, super important. So yeah.
So you know what's really interesting? You know a lot about politics. Just listening to you and how you're speaking, the average person doesn't know this, does it? How do we get them to understand and know this?
Yeah. So obviously, like I'm involved in politics, so I know I have a lot more information and done a lot more research than the average person. And it's not necessarily reasonable to expect that every person would have that level of information. I mean, I've committed my undergraduate career to studying that, so it makes sense that I would have a little more information than the average person. One thing I think is important that gets skipped over a lot, with the public, is that people don't realize how much of an impact politics has on their daily life. Especially like everybody from like the president all the way down to like your local mayor and commissioner and like school board members. Those people also have a huge impact, on your life, and you know, on all different services. I just think that people need to be aware that their voice matters, and that it's not just about like, you're not just a voter. Voting is important, but people feel that their elected officials only come around every 4 years when it's time to get reelected, and I can see why people feel that way. And so it's the responsibility of those elected officials to be catering to the needs of their constituents all the time, not just when they need their votes. But it's also difficult right now to tell people like, learn more about politics when you have no idea where they're getting that information from, no
Right.
idea if it's true or if it's, you know. So It's definitely difficult, but I think that people realize we need to build off the momentum of the election. Every election year, especially presidential election year, everybody gets super, super involved in politics, and then the election happens and they drop it. So keeping that momentum going is super important.
So let's skip to Stephanie Murphy. I met her once. I have a picture with her in her office in Washington. Can you tell me what's it like working for Stephanie Murphy?
Yeah, it's been a great experience so far. I feel like I've learned a lot just sitting in on like some of their meetings and also meetings like for congressional staff. So I've really enjoyed working with her. I previously worked for Representative Carlos Guillermo Smith, who is the Florida State House rep for the UCF area, and I really enjoyed that, the like legislative research, that sort of aspect of politics. So it's been great to get back into that.
Pretty cool. And I can ask you a wealth of questions. I mean, I really enjoy talking with you. So from the women's rights perspective, there's a lot of controversy around the First Lady and whether she should be First Lady Biden or she should be Dr. Biden. What's Hannah's thoughts?
Um, that controversy is just like it's almost like despicable to me. That doesn't even make sense. Um, what her title should be. I mean, one person can hold more than one title, right? So yeah, she is the first lady. She also holds a doctor, a PhD, and so she is Dr. Jill Biden. And she can be more than one thing at once. You would never think that if a man held a PhD and was a doctor and then became the president, that would never be an issue. Nobody would ever think like, oh, like you have to drop your doctorate and be president, whatever now. It's just about how you address people in different settings. And, you know, the title also, like, it's important, but those are both important roles that she holds. She's also the first lady in history to continue to work, to hold the first full-time job. She's going to continue to be a professor, as she's done in the past, and as she did when she was second lady. So I think that that's really awesome, and it's cool for people like women my age, but also for little girls to see that like the first lady doesn't need to like quit her job and put her whole life on hold because her husband is now the president. Like that's cool, but like she can still have a life. She can still be a teacher. She can still, you know, live her own life and pursue her own goals. And she doesn't need to put her career on hold because of her husband's career. I think that's a really important thing for young girls to see in our country. So yeah, I mean the controversy around like there was that article published in I believe it was the Washington Post about
Yep.
how her doctorate isn't real because it's doctorate in
Right.
education. That
Right.
doesn't even make sense. I mean, I have so many professors that are addressed as doctor last name, and they don't hold
The work that she's done, right?
right. They don't hold medical doctorates, and you know, if she was like on an airplane and they were asking for a doctor, like she's not going to stand up. Like she knows that she's not a medical doctor, but that
Exactly.
doesn't mean that that
Exactly.
title doesn't make that title is you know not
It's
worthy.
not, they're trying to make it like she's using the title to be elitist or whatever have you. It's no, I mean, she worked hard.
Right.
Anybody who does that type of work works hard for that. And you're right, you have to stay in your lane. You know
Absolutely.
what your doctoral degree is
Right.
able to put forth. Now, unless you know CPR, don't do CPR if you're just because you have doctor in front of your name. So you got a lot of information within you as a young person. So I want you to think back to some younger people. So people like little boys and girls who know about what's happening in the world, who know that these things are happening in terms of politics and you know the disparities that are out there in some cases. What do you say to them? So I mean, if you were to speak to a Sanjay or to a Summer Joy, that's my daughter, and people who work for me, she has a son by the name of Sanjay. And so what would you say to them in terms of getting involved and being a part of the political scene?
Yeah, definitely. I also have a little sister. We're 8 years apart, so it's interesting to see like her grow up, and she is much more politically inclined than I was when I was her age. Um, but definitely, yeah, if a child is interested in politics, that should absolutely be like they should continue to pursue that interest, to stay involved, to get as involved as they can. Politics as like a career field or as a field in general can feel kind of daunting. It can feel like, wow, that person's like really important, and like I can't talk to the president, like I can't, like those people are super important. And they shouldn't feel that way. They work for you. Your congressional, whoever, like your representatives, they work for you. And if you want to talk to them, like, are they busy? Yeah, but at least somebody in their office should be willing to talk to you. And I would say that good first steps are to get involved with your local elected officials. Yeah, I mean, you're not gonna be able to get like President Biden on the phone, but you may be able to speak to like a school board member, or a commissioner, a council person in your town. And those people are just as important. And the work that they do really impacts everybody's daily life, especially with children, school board members, if they go to public school, those people impact, every aspect of their life essentially. So yeah, definitely figuring out what they're passionate about, and continuing to stay involved is really great.
Are there any things that you all do, whether it be the Republican student group or your group, that does any mentoring for these young kids? And what would that look like if you all do?
Yeah. So we have, a lot of our members are freshmen. So obviously those are not young kids, they're college students, but typically they're at the beginning of their like political journey, I guess I'll call it. They're usually like around 18, and so they've never voted before. We also have recently been partnering with Winter Springs High School in Seminole County. They have like a high school Democrats organization, on their campus. So we've been working with them, trying to help them put on events, get in contact with local leaders, and also help them outside of politics with their like college applications and that sort of stuff. So yeah, definitely reaching out to high school Democrats or any high school students really, who are interested in politics is a great way to get them set up for their college career and beyond.
Excellent. Any last minute things you want to share while we have you? We're getting ready to get close to the end of our time. So anything else that you would like to share with the viewing public?
Yeah, just that, keep in mind that politics impacts every single aspect of your life, even if you think that it doesn't. Every time you walk out of your house and you step on a sidewalk, that was put down by the government. When you drive your car and you stop at a stoplight, that was put in by the government. UCF students, UCF is a public school, that's funded by the government. So don't be afraid to make your voice heard. Reach out to your local elected officials, call your senators, call your congresspeople. That's super, super important. So yeah, just making sure that you're staying involved, that your voice is heard, even on campus, reaching out to your student government, to make sure that you're not silenced. It can be a little daunting, but it's super important.
Hannah, I'm so proud of you. I'm proud of what you're doing as a student. I'm proud of what you're looking to do in the future. I can't wait. I'm excited. I'm going to keep your name in my head for sure because I want to see your growth on this scene. So thank you so much. Thank you for being a part of
Of
today,
course,
and
thank you for having me.
for sharing your views and just being so open and not only open but open-minded and willing to kind of challenge not even just the status quo, but even yourself in terms of how you see the world and things, and always educating yourself and things along those lines. So you are doing phenomenally with the Democratic organization on campus, and I'm just so glad that you were able to be with us today. So thank you, and I hope you have a good weekend as you head into whatever it is that you're going to do next.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. I really enjoy being on your program. I think that you're muted, Dr. Butler.
I don't know what's going on with my computer right now. It said that if I hit the space bar, it would let me do it. So I didn't necessarily know that. But anyway, I don't know what you heard. But what I was trying to say was our show next week is going to be on our first Black History Month show. And it's going to be with Dr. Ann Schillenford. And she's going to do some conversation around her research with Black mothers and Black mothers of Black sons and what goes on in the lives of those women And so I look forward to you all. I thank you again, Hannah. Thank you for being a part of today's podcast. And we'll see you next week. All right. We'll talk to you later. And one last thing I would say is thank our UCF Foundation for being a support for our podcast.